Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning to all. As Chairman of the Audit Committee, I'd like to open the meeting, please. And I would first of all ask members to confirm they're present, please. So I'll turn over to Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can members of the committee please confirm that they're present when their name is called? Councillor Morn.
Present.
Councillor Skinner.
Present.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
Councillor Stokes.
Present.
Mr Middleton.
Present.
Mr Holdenby.
Present.
Also, committee members, the following officers are in attendance: Julie Castledine, Principal Auditor; David Coleman, Monitoring Officer; Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources; Michelle Grady, Assistant Director for Strategic Finance; David Ingham, Head of Information Assurance; Claire Mackey, Accounting, Investment and Governance Manager; Sue Maycock, Head of Finance Corporate; Lucy Pledge, Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management; Jill Thomas, Principal Auditor; and Matt Waller, Internal Audit Manager. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Cheryl. If we could move then to item 1, apologies for absence, and I'll ask Cheryl now if we have any apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. We have received apologies for absence from Councillors Spencer and Coupland.
Thank you, Cheryl. If we can now move to item 2, declaration of members' interests. Members to declare interest using the chat function to request to speak. Do I have any declarations? We don't have any declarations, Cheryl, so if we can then move on, please, to item 3, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2020. And I will request that the committee confirm the minutes as recorded. And they can be found on pages 5 to 12 of the agenda pack for your information. So, if I could have a second for those minutes, please. I propose.
Quite happy to second them, Chairman.
Thank you. And are all members are asked to raise their hands so it is visible on the camera to the chairman to indicate acceptance of the minutes. Okay. Raise your hand, Andrew, please. I saw you're not voting, so I do apologise to the independent members for my mistake there. So I can confirm that the minutes have agreed by all the members. Thank you. So if we can now move to the Internal Audit Annual Report 2019-20. I'd like to invite Lucy Pledge to present the report, and I will identify it when members indicate.
Thank you, Chairman. So this annual report is required under the Account and Audit Regulations. It provides the committee with my independent annual opinion on governance, risk and control, and also the results of the internal audit work. If I can take members to page 20 of the pack, that brings the opinions all together. As you can see, all areas across the council are performing adequately. So this recognises that the arrangements are working, but also that there's areas that need improvement. I would also draw to the attention of the committee that I've added a caveat to the opinion to take into account the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that will have on the control environment. So by and large, last year's has been unaffected, but it will have an impact in the current year, and we're not quite sure what that will be at this moment. What we are doing is looking at the audit plan to look at the assurance opinions and my opinion for next year. But because the report is needs to be contemporary in terms of my opinion, I've added that caveat. So if I can take you to pages 21, that is the start of the opinions. So the rest of the opinion is sort of set out in pages 21 and 28, and this provides you with the basis of my opinion on the areas of governance, risk, internal control and financial control. But I would actually draw a key area to your attention on page 21, and that's the annual governance statement. So the committee has considered the annual governance statement, and I can give assurance that my opinion has been fully considered in drawing that opinion up, and the areas of improvement and the significant governance issues have been incorporated in that annual governance statement, which is also being considered by this committee. So the results of the internal audit work start in the report on page 29. So if I can just take you to that to bring out the key headlines there. A moment. So I can confirm that we have delivered 94% of the plan. As previously reported, we have focused on looking at our performance and delivery following the bump in the road for last year. So that is work ongoing, but I am pleased and really proud of the team in delivering 94% of the revised plan during some really trying times towards the end of the year. The area that we reprioritised when we spoke in February was around IT. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic meant that we couldn't deliver that and engage with IT and the supplier at that time, but we have got that all in hand, and that's being scheduled for August, September onwards. So that has been planned to be picked up as soon as we could. So again, that hopefully gives you some assurance around the delivery of that key area of work. And that is mentioned in the restrictions of scope. Under the accounts and audit regulations and our standards, I'm required to identify any impairment to my opinion. I haven't had any impairment, but IT remains an area that we are having difficulty in scheduling work with the client. That has been resolved this year, so we have got those scheduled in, as I stated. So we look to deliver those. We therefore get our assurance for my opinion through the combined assurance, and the Executive Director Commercial gave the committee those assurances direct at the meeting in February. So I think the rest of the report sets out some other areas of significance, which is around where we've done other work around consultancy. That's on page 30. So whilst these aren't assurance pieces, they all relate to our core function, which is around governance, risk and control. So we give assurances around the design and projects as they're being developed, but we don't actually give an assurance opinion at the end of the work. We tend to give highlight reports and they're issued, but we do track the recommendations in the normal way. So the other area under the public sector internal audit standards is that I'm required to report to the committee is around quality. It's essential and outlined in the audit and accounts regulations that the council maintains an effective internal audit function. One of the key attributes of that is having a quality assurance framework and a quality assurance improvement plan. And this basically, the next couple of pages, sets out that within the report, hopefully giving you assurance. We've self-assessed us against these standards and the sit for application notes, and the areas of improvement, what we've identified is on page 32. And as any professional practice, we are always continuously improving, and we always seek feedback at the end of any audit assignment. And the external assessment is due for next year. So I'll be engaging with the Audit Committee on setting that up for 2021. So I think the rest of the report is pretty self-explanatory. There's some benchmarking, information for members. You can see, by and large, the corporate assurances and recommendations have gone up, and schools are better. Schools are less so. So that is an area that we continue to give assurance around and work with our children's services colleagues. And I'm pleased to report, to put the report to the committee and respond to any questions.
Thank you, Lucy, for your presentation of the internal audit annual report and your explanations there too. I think I've just got a little message from Andrew Cookham, who is I think he's apologised. He's having some connection problems, but hopefully Andrew will be with us in full shortly. Okay, so I have Andrew and Ian. My first speakers, please. So Andrew and then Ian. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you for that. And I was pleased to hear your final comment about, as a professional service, you're always striving for improvement, as witnessed by the peer review exercise you did. And of course, the SITFA award for the second year is suggestion that you're doing okay. Can you tell me a little bit more, please, about the external assessment, how rigorous it is, who does it, and how you prepare for it?
Okay, so the external assessment is undertaken by an accredited qualified assessor as determined by a professional body, which is the Institute of Internal Auditors. So there's a criteria that needs to be assessed. The approach is signed off by yourselves. So I bring a paper to the committee setting out how we propose to do the external assessment. And we usually go out for requests for quotes from some professional bodies to do that. So that usually is the institute itself, SITFA, and an external firm. So we get 3 quotes to look at and assess. And then that comes through to the chair and vice chair for sign off, and Andrew Cookham as the executive director for sign off. So the approach is, they have varied approaches, but we go for a full external assessment rather than a partial self-assessment and then a sign-off of our self-assessment. So that will involve a meeting with the committee, a meeting with some of our key stakeholders, and also our external suppliers. There will be some examples of our audit, so they will walk through some of our audit assignments, look at our working payments, and really benchmark us against the standards. So in effect, we are audited. So it is the shoes, as they say, is on the other foot. So we get audited by someone else, and they give us an opinion around that compliance. So it's quite a rigorous process, and it also engages. So it's a combination of looking at our people, our skills, our qualifications, etc., and leadership. Also looking at our systems for delivery, and also getting client and customer feedback on the difference we make and how effective we are. So hopefully that sets out, and you get a report that is pulled. Again, independent report, signed off in a normal way as an audit report for factual accuracy, but that process is coordinated by the Section 151 officer and the chairman of the Audit Committee. So they do the scope, they do the report. So I'm sort of at arm's length of that process.
Could I follow, please, Chair? And the preparation for it, when does that start, and are we involved, etc.?
So the preparation starts in September, so because it takes a bit of time to do the procurement side, and also as part of an internal, so we make sure that we do have all our ducks lined up, to be honest, in terms of making sure that we've got everything that we would expect to be there, and we put it on a project footing. So you're not involved in the detail, but you are involved in signing off the approach.
Thank you, Andrew, and for the supplementary. Ian, and then if I could turn to Rob and then Paul, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy, having gone through many of those myself, no, absolutely agree. It is a really good beneficial exercise, and I'm really glad you're going through as well. Sometimes you do get a little bit of that's nice, but actually doesn't really take you forward, but they do come up with some good things, so that's great. I suppose really what I'm looking, my point is around the impact of COVID and the limitation of assurances now, that effectively when you're looking back at the planning on what we've already provided assurances on. So most assurances when the internal audit have a shelf life, it's valid for a certain period of time. And obviously with COVID, that's going to limit it even more so, and some of them where you could have even done a report 2 or 3 months ago is no longer effectively an assurance because the world has changed. So what will be really helpful is a request for next time when you're having a look at the impact on the plan and feeding that back to us. Could you also play back in for me where we have changed the plan because stuff we've provided assurances on, the world's changed, therefore we need to go back and do it again, because even though we only did it 6 months ago, it needs to be redone because it's changed so fundamentally. Because I think that context for me, tying up to the bit where we've reduced the amount of hours we've done or days we've done this year, it's just trying to get a grasp around about what we can do, what we can place reliance on. It's not as simple as year-on-year planning. So it's just being able to present that back to us, please, in a way that we understand. We can't take a piece of work we did a year ago. It doesn't matter. We need to do something different. I think that would be helpful, please, when you're looking at the planning.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think the key thing picking up from your statement is that the world has changed. So I think and the assurance framework has changed. What we're doing is recasting the plan. So and that plan will be based on risk. So some of the things that we may have looked at, as you say, they may have changed assurance, but they still may not feature in our plan because they're not significant enough, because there is a lot of change. So our focus and strategy is to base it on risk. So there will be some things that are must-dos, and obviously financial control. We spoke last time around the risk of fraud, so that's being picked up by the counter fraud team. So and again, we do the combined assurance, so that is still quite critical in my overall opinion. But we are bringing the revised plan to you in September, so I'll put that as a separate report, so not included it in the progress report, so that you can see and we can have a more in-depth discussion around the impact. Matt has also been meeting with, and the principals have been meeting with the directors, and there's a even more client engagement to identify what are the key risks, what are the key areas of assurance going forward. There will be an impact on the delivery of the plan because of the lockdown and accessibility. So we have had some downtime in Q1. But we have, by and large, managed to look at the transformation programme and focus on where we're going to do our work based on risk. So hopefully that, so we might not look as in depth as at all the areas that we looked at last year, because the world has moved on so much, Ian. So it's about risk for me and what assurances are vital for the Section 151. And critical areas of the business around transformation.
I completely agree, and I think if I may just, Chair, just to follow up on that one, again, what we're seeing in our world is the risks, actually some of the risks have changed, but actually some of the risks are the same. The issue is actually the controls have changed because we've had to operate them during a different environment. And it's that sort of awareness of understanding, saying what was a relatively safe thing before isn't as much now. So we're doing things virtually, we're doing things using the approval sign-offs. And again, it's that understanding would be really helpful. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Ian. And Lucy, Rob.
Thank you. My question follows on, and it's exactly the same area, but it's more specific, and it's to do with the assurances that we've had some issues with in relation to adult social care and the continuation of our capacity to maintain a service through agencies, the private care sector, which depends heavily on staff recruited from other parts of the world. And I just wonder, to move from the abstract way that was being discussed previously with the report coming in September to specifically one of the most important areas that we deliver services for, or we have a responsibility for, which is delivery of adult social care, whether it's through individuals living in residential homes or through home care. So in advance of the September paper, you know, where we think we stand in relation to high and substantial, limited or low assurances in that respect.
Right. Just make sure my mic was off. The CLT are on a regular basis looking at the risks around and assurances around that. So that is an area that is being reviewed on a regular basis. What I can do, so I don't have to hand the assurance intelligence, but I can do a follow-up briefing paper for the committee on where we are. So I don't have that data to hand, Councillor Parker, but it is something that's on the CLT's radar in terms of both risk and recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Lucy. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Lucy, for a very thorough report as usual. Just moving my attention to page 35, and it's the overdue actions, just seeking assurance that all of those, is that all due to COVID-19?
What page, sorry, did you say?
Page 35, there's 7 overdue actions, and I'm just seeking assurances that that's just due to COVID-19.
I'll have to hand over to Matt or Julie on that one because they'll know the details. We follow them up, but I'm not sure whether the reasons for them being outstanding are just due to COVID. So I'll hand over to Matt.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Lucy. Are you talking about, can I just check what page that was? Sorry, Councillor. Page 35?
It's page 35 of the public pack. High priority actions overdue. There's 2. And there's 5 medium priority actions overdue. I'm just seeking reassurances around the overdue nature was COVID. But obviously, like other things, if we had problems before, for instance, the computing side, we had problems before COVID-19, it's likely that we would have problems after.
Yeah, I think COVID has had an impact on those. Can I get back to you on the actual reasons for each one? I couldn't say to you now all of those are because of COVID. I suspect that's had an impact, but would it be all right to just get back to you on the reasons for that?
Of course, and I think the other members of the committee probably benefit from that. I'm sorry to ask you a tricky question, but I've been sat here thinking with one for ages. Thank you very much.
No, that's quite all right, and that's easy to get that information. I just haven't got it to hand, but we'll certainly feed that back to the committee on the reasons we've got for that, the impact that COVID's had, or whether there's some other things that have tied into that. So we'll get that message back.
I'm partially reassured with with what Lucy has said, in that the plan has been adapted as we've gone on through COVID, and I'm really pleased both with the county officers and back home our borough officers to how they've stepped up and changed their way of working, because it's been difficult for us all, but to actually continue, and I'll compliment all of you. Thank you for that. But page 36, 100% rated our service good to excellent. 100% buy into that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for offering to forward us the additional information. That's very good of you. Thank you, and thank you for everyone for the questions. Do I have any further speakers? I can't see on my chat that's no, we're all happy. Always no further questions. So if it's if members are content, if we can move to the I will propose the recommendations. That's number 1. We consider the content of the Head of Internal Audit's annual opinion and report any actions that it may wish to take, i.e. the committee. And 2, review the results of the internal audit work and delivery of the internal audit plan, evaluating the overall effectiveness of the internal audit function in discharging its statutory responsibilities and meeting the council's 3rd line of defence assurance needs. So if I propose, and obviously we've had contributions regarding our evaluation and review and third-party review of the internal audit function, and also regarding our ever-changing risks regarding COVID-19 and adult social care, particularly on the recruitment side with Brexit imminent, or finalisation imminent, and also Paul's point about the outstanding action. So with those in mind, could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Quiet.
Thank you. So with that in mind, could I request that members in favour of the recommendation raise their hands in front of the camera? You're raising. I think that's unanimous. Thank you. So those are carried, members, at item 4. Excuse me. So if we then move on to item 5, which is the approval of the council's annual governance statement, and obviously this is which subject we addressed at our last meeting, and if I could invite Lucy to present the amendments, etc., to this document.
Thank you, Chairman. So at the last meeting on the 15th of June, the committee considered the draft report. What this is bringing back those amendments for the committee to approve the final annual governance statement. So I've highlighted in yellow the key changes, and I outlined those in the summary report. But the key changes are on page 59. If I can take you there. And the request was around making a narrative and putting something in a bit more detail around the behind plans. So I've done that. The Executive Director Commercial and the programme transformation programme has given some information on the IT governance and business world on re-engagement. So hopefully that satisfies that request. And then the other key change was around the assurances, and that's on page 72. If I can just take you to that bookmark page. The request was to list all the differences in the assurance map, because the assurances had gone down. That would be quite a big list. What we have done is identified in the areas of improvement, those key areas, and I've expanded that there will be recognising the control environment for the council. Some areas will remain at amber. So we've pulled together the key areas of improvement of the assurance map, and those are listed. And also Councillor Parker raised around the hard to recruit. So that is in the transformation programme under our people. So I've just expanded those areas, headings and themes. So I haven't gone into the detail, but I've made sure that they're captured in the themes are given rather than just the summary of the programme. So hopefully I sufficiently covered what you fed back at the last meeting. It was really just expanding on some of the areas. The committee had no further feedback around the significant governance issue, which still remains the recovery from COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I have Alex indicating you wish to speak, Alex. If I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lucy, for adding those details into the statement. I'm quite happy to support the amended document, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments, members? If these are the adjustments we requested last time, I'm happy to propose the recommendations, and I take it, Alex, that was you seconding them.
Yeah, I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. So I'll read the recommendations out. That the committee consider the contents of the AGS for 2019-20. And 1, agree that it accurately reflects how the council is run. 2, that the statement includes the significant governance issues and key risks it would have expected to be published. And 3, approves the statement and recommends it for adoption by the council. So again, could I have a show of hands on those recommendations, please? Thank you. Thank you. I think that's fully carried. Oh, thank you. Thank you, members. Okay, so if we can now move on to item 6, which is the Monitoring Officers Annual Report. And I'd like to say hello to David Coleman, who is going to present this report. And so I'll pass over to David. Thank you, David.
Thank you and good morning. So this report is a look back over 2019-20 across the matters within my remit as the monitoring officer. It's a report that was requested in November when we brought the results of the working group's consideration of the code of conduct to the committee, which then went on to full council. Across those areas, I'll just pick out some of the areas. So the question of lawfulness, which is obviously a critical element of what I do, both as monitoring officer and chief legal officer. I think it's fair to say there's a pretty robust process within the council of checking of reports and ensuring that all decision-making reports have got legal comments on them, which are designed to give reassurance that that the decision is within the council's powers and meets all of the other requirements of lawful decision-making. The local government ombudsman position is that there were 6 cases of fault found in 2019-20. There is an outstanding second report from the ombudsman, which is about to go through consideration by the board scrutiny committee and by executive in September and October. That relates to the way in which the council administers its payment arrangements within social care. There is a section there on the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is a regulated area of the council's activity, probably not particularly well known, in which the council can authorise the use of direct surveillance or things like secret purchases. There were obviously 5 examples in which the council authorised that type of activity during the year. It is fairly low level activity by the standards of certain other organisations, and as a result of that, the Office of the Investigatory Powers Commission don't really take a lot of interest in us in terms of inspecting us, although they do expect an annual return from us, and then if they've got any concerns, they can contact us. But it's fair to say that they haven't indicated any concerns to us. So I'm hoping that the report was helpful in giving you an idea of kind of assurance across the areas within my remit. If there are any kind of things that you would like to see covered differently or in more detail or otherwise in future reports, I'd be very pleased to hear your feedback and obviously to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. I have first Andrew wishes to speak, and then Ian, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is on page 81, David, and it's the areas where fault were found. The summary of these, 3 of the summary points are concerned with health and care plans, education, health and care plans, and it was the top one that raised the queries in me particularly. Are each of these 3, have any of them got an element of policy that is found wanting, or systems and controls that are found wanting, or were they individual officer mistakes? And secondly, in the top one, the council agreed to pay a financial remedy for the distress caused and for any shortfall in the child's education. Is it possible that a financial payment can compensate for lack of education? Is that shutting the stable door after the horse has gone? And does it reveal inadequacy in the education provision for this cohort of children?
So I would need to go back into the detail of the cases to answer your first question in relation to what the issues were. But generally, the Ombudsman is looking at failures of process and administration. Generally speaking, if there is an issue of policy, then he will raise it, but he's principally looking at administrative matters. But I'm quite happy to provide additional information on those cases for you if that is something that you would like to have. I think, can you remind me of the other 2 questions? Sorry.
The top case was remedied in inverted commas.
Yes.
By payment of a financial payment, but does that remedy the loss of education that that child was disadvantaged by?
Well, I think the short answer is it's hard to imagine that financial recompense would be. I think this is just an element of what the Ombudsman has the power and doesn't have the power to consider. So the Ombudsman will generally kind of accept as being acceptable some kind of financial recompense for the individual who made the complaint, normally to do with the inconvenience caused by the maladministration, sometimes by distress, things like that. It's a strange way to put it, in a way, to say that it was compensation for lost education. I suspect that it was compensation for the maladministration in the sense of the inconvenience caused to the complainant by having to bring a complaint in the first place.
If I might add, Chair, with 3 cases, we've been publicly wrapped over the knuckles for 3 examples of provision under education, health and care plans. Is there something systemic here that needs a look at from internal audit?
Lucy, would you like to come in on that one?
We can certainly feed it into our risk-based assessment as one of the injects for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Just from the chair, I think also something around what is our policy on with external care providers about sticking to medication plans and not ignoring them, because that could be life-threatening, and it's something we would need, we would want some assurance on, that actually that the policy there was actually robust enough to not be circumvented. Thank you. Ian, then
thank
Bob.
you, Chair. Just a quick question on the paper. I had a minute, I got confused at the top of page 81. I just wanted to check how the numbers stack up, because they seem to be flipping around. 55 referrals, of which we then say 40 resulted in no fault being found. But the last bit that says, or because it was investigated and no fault found, and then it says 8 of these were cases where as a result of investigation no fault was found. I'm just trying to can you just go through the numbers again for me? I understand the 6 of where we had found and the 55 referrals, and I'm just trying to bridge the other 49 from those numbers you got on there. Is that the 40 where
so I think,
and then 9 referrals are still ongoing? Is that the 49?
So I think, so the 40 is the 20 referrals not investigated, 8 no fault was found after being investigated, and then 12 being premature.
In the 40, that's fine. So that is basically the 40 being broken down. That's fine.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make absolutely certain that's where I was going, and then the 9 are ongoing. Of the 9 that are ongoing, just taking Andrew's lead, are there any threads comparable to the table below? So are we seeing of that 9? Again, I appreciate you may not have the detail now, but if we've got another 4 or 5 EHCP related things in there and medications in there, I think it's helpful to know if there is that sort of continuity of concern, or are there any other hotspots coming out of those that are going on. I think that would be helpful.
I can provide that information separately. I mean, clearly these are cases which have not yet resulted in a finding that anything was at fault. So subject to that, I can certainly give an indication as to whether, as you say, there are areas causing concern sufficient for somebody to make a complaint.
And that's fine. They will be taken in the counselling which they're given, which is they haven't been resolved. But again, as if it's just there is the answer of there's a thematic pattern, even if we haven't got to that point. I think it's important we understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob.
Hi. On page 81, there are 5 faults and details of action taken, and over the page there's another one. That makes 6 in total. When we get a complaint, the sort of seems to be a process, or there should be a process of acknowledgement, investigation, and then once we have some findings where we're at fault, it seems to me that rule 1 is to apologise. Okay, that's the basic thing that you do before you then look to remedy. Of the 6 actions taken here, we've got 4 where we make it clear that we apologised, and there's 2 where there's no mention of an apology. Now, that could be because different people have written each of the actions taken, but I just wanted to be clear that where we find that we were at fault, that an apology happens in 100% of the cases, rather than in 4 out of 6 that we've got in front of us here.
My experience is that an apology goes along with the finding, but I can double check. It may well be that the way in which it's been described in each of these cases, there's something has got missed off.
Okay.
David, I think your apology is your starting point when you've been found to have not has been found at fault, I think, and the compensation may go with that, but the apology, I think, is at least, at the very least, a courtesy rather than apart from anything else. Okay, so do we have any further questions for David, please, members? No? So I have the recommendations, what recommendation that the Audit Committee receives and considers the Monitoring Office annual report, which I think we've done. So I will propose that. Do I have a second?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. So in the usual manner, members, could we all raise our hands if we approve of that recommendation? Thank you. Okay, I think that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So we now move to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct. And again, if I can pass to David for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. So this brings to the attention of the committee a Model Code of Conduct, which was recently published by the Local Government Association and is currently under consultation. It flowed from a recommendation of the Committee on Standards in Public Life in the report that the committee considered last year on local government ethics. And they recommended that the Local Government Association produced a model code of conduct, the principle being that I think they found a degree of variability in the various codes and that a model code might assist with consistency across the sector. It's presented for information and for the committee to decide whether it wishes to respond to the consultation. In those circumstances, it might be worth me just running through it a bit and giving a kind of indication about where it sits against the council's existing code, of course reviewed last year and amended in December by full council. So the first thing to say is that it doesn't look all that different to our code in essence. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It's not drafted as if it were a legal code with a long list of definitions and then kind of legal language. So I think they've attempted to make it a very usable document. It operates with a preamble, a bit like our own. So our own code has a preamble which sets out the Nolan principles as the overall guiding principles of public life. And this code does something very similar. And it's drafted in such a way that there's a kind of quite a brief basic principle and then a fuller kind of explanation of what's meant by the principle, which follows on from it, which is not unlike our own code as well. So one of the questions that's raised within the document is around what you should say about a councillor acting in their capacity as a councillor. In fact, the way in which the model code treats this is very similar again to the way in which our own code treats it. So effectively, they use words around claiming to act or giving the impression of acting in your capacity as a councillor and suggest that is sufficient. We use exactly the same words, although what we say is that is a relevant consideration for the monitoring officer to take into account in determining whether somebody was acting in the capacity as a councillor or not. I think the difference with the model code is that it would almost define it in that way. Moving through the different elements of the code, there's an introduction of a concept of civility, which is very similar to our own concept of respect. I think there is a sense in which there's a vagueness to both of those concepts, and the question of which of them is more fitting for a code might be a question of discussion. There is, interestingly, a section in the model code on how members can react to themselves not being shown civility by members of the public or the people that they come into contact with. And there was some discussion in the working group about the kind of behaviour that members witness from members of the public, and this seems to be an attempt to kind of recognise that that happens and to build it into the code in some way. There is a section which isn't in our code about the impartiality of officers. Our code kind of touches on it in areas such as openness and objectivity. So the question about whether you should be treating all these public matters that come before you for decision objectively. So if you are effectively trying to get an officer to change their report to make it say what you want it to say, then clearly there is a lack of objectivity in the way in which you're approaching it. So you could say that our code touches on that, but this model code clearly brings it out in much more detail. There is a section on confidentiality and access to information, which we beefed up to quite a large extent through the working group when our own code was reviewed. It slightly differently deals with the question of confidentiality in the sense that the model code would allow confidential information to be disclosed if it was required by law. Our code deals with it slightly differently, and it was a matter of some discussion in the working group where it was much more concerned with the way in which a member balances their duty of confidentiality and the public interest. And ours actually says that you can disclose it where it would be permitted by law rather than required by law. So there's a bit of a difference in emphasis there between the two codes in their treatment of confidentiality. The next area which doesn't have an equivalent in our own code is the introduction of an obligation not to bring the council into disrepute. But apart from a couple of references to deceit and dishonesty in the model code's commentary on this particular element, it's not all that easy to see what it is that you're meant to take from that. So it is quite wide, and one of the questions within the consultation is whether it's too vague or not. So, they referred to deceit and dishonesty, but it must be much wider than that. There is another provision which isn't in our code separately, which is about use of council resources, although you could again argue that some elements of our requirement of integrity to act in the public interest rather than your own interest could be sufficiently wide to cover a member who misused publicly provided resources. And then there is rather more information in their treatment of interest. So this was a discussion within the working group again as to whether the council should have a wider definition of interest than the disclosable pecuniary interests set out in the legislation. The Model Code of Conduct widens treatment of interest in a couple of ways, really. One is that it does introduce some wider interests, in particular involvement in charitable or other public bodies. But it also widens out the scope of the people whose interests might be relevant beyond a spouse or a civil partner or somebody who's living with somebody as a spouse or civil partner, to include family, friends, relatives or close associates. And I couldn't myself find in the document a definition of those terms. So again, there might be a question there about how widely that goes. Our own treatment of interests backed up the references to the disclosable pecuniary interest by making it clear that your overarching responsibility is to resolve any potential conflict of interest in favour of the public interest, and that therefore, in that sense, the council's version is, if anything, wider potentially than the attempt to define it within the model code. Two more points really. One, gifts and hospitality, where they raise a question as to whether the correct level for that is £25. We set it at 50. And the other thing is that social media is dealt with, I would say, in the model code in a very similar way to the way that it's dealt with in the Lincolnshire Code, in the sense that it's recognised as being there, it's recognised as carrying risk with it in relation to the way in which people communicate through it, but it's not pulled out and given any greater prominence than that, and it's not in itself got any particular heading within the code. So I think it's with that in mind, it's just a question of how the committee wants to take forward a response to the LGA's consultation. The suggestion in the report is that I would draft something, probably sticking quite closely to the principles that were established only in November of last year as to the way in which the committee wanted to see the code go, and that probably via email, if that's acceptable, I would consult and get the feedback from the committee before submitting something by the deadline, which I think is mid-August. Thank you.
Andrew,
thank you, Chair. This I read with great interest, David. As I think I mentioned previously, I'm the independent person in another authority, so I've had some encounter with code components of this nature. To some extent, I was surprised that the model code had so many differences from our own, albeit some of them you've indicated are semantic. And yes, if there are semantic differences and general terms like civility are not widely understood to the same extent by everybody, I think the more in your consultation document you can explain what is meant by that, that would be extremely useful. As for disrepute, you've mentioned social media, and equally I've said before, the last 6 cases in one particular authority have involved unwise use of social media, which have been interpreted by the constituent as bringing the authority into disrepute and not showing appropriate respect to the constituent. But that will be in the eye of the beholder very often. So these are very difficult things to get right. And finally, you say you're going to draft and consult with the committee. I wonder whether that consultation needs to be wider than that. It should go to the whole 70 members of the council.
I think the suggestion of consulting with the committee was to, as it were, elicit a Lincolnshire County Council response through the body which is fixed by the council with overseeing standards. The consultation is quite clear, I think, that it could be responded to by anybody, and what I certainly will do is circulate it around all members and give them the opportunity either to feed in to me prior to the date so that I can take that into account, or indeed to respond personally with their own responses to the consultation.
Rob.
Sure, thank you. I was a member of the working group that came up with the Lincolnshire County Council version, and I think that David actually reflected pretty well some of our thinking. I noticed that he made reference to, I think, the notes that he must have made at the time to be able to be reasonably explicit. I'll give you an example. The question of respect and civility are much the same side of a coin. Respect and civility go hand in hand, and we chose respect, but we could have easily gone for civility. So it's really, in a sense, the nuance rather than the principle because none of the code of conduct are sufficiently tightly drawn up to be able to be used in a way that is precise, so that it's clear that somebody falls clearly within or clearly without. So it's about getting a code of conduct which is expected of people who put their names forward to become councillors. So it would be good if some of those nuances could be put together by David, in the sense that I, for one, and I was a member of the group, don't feel as though any of these are so outrageous that we would have discounted them. So I think that the question of getting a response from David before us, so that we as an audit committee can view what David is thinking about, which I think reflects at least the working group, before the 17th of August, so that we can do it virtually, not online, but by responding to what David is putting before us.
Thank you, Rob. Would that be possible, David? Can we do that, please?
Yes, certainly. So I will pull together a response. I mean, so some of the questions are kind of, you know, do you agree a lot? Do you agree a little bit? You know, those kinds of questions. But there are a number of boxes for completing, you know, any comments that you might have to do that. And I think if I pull something together drawn from the experience of the working group, which is certainly, you know, the last time, and it's not so long ago that the council looked into these issues in quite a degree of detail and put quite a lot of thought into that. I would have thought an initial response which kind of reflects the thinking behind that exercise wouldn't be a million miles away. And then if members of the committee have got ways in, you know, other thoughts, then they can be pulled in.
Thank you, David. Just going back to, I think, what Andrew, I think you mentioned it before about, I think, David, you mentioned it about civility for members of the public. Well, I think as a local councillor, if people are rude to you, from my experience, you should just take it on the chin, unless they're being really aggressive. In my 20 years that I've been a councillor, both district and county, I've only had one person that I found was so threatening that I was really quite worried about it, but that was on the phone, not face to face. But I know with social media that's another issue. But I don't think we can really legislate for that. It's something I think we have to deal with at the time. So, any further speakers? Thank you. So, if we could move to the two recommendations, which I will propose, and then I'll look for a seconder. That we note and consider the draft model code of conduct for the purpose of the consultation, and David has kindly said he will feed his responses back to us for any comments, and we will make that representation through the LJ. So those are the two recommendations there. So do I have a seconder? Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. Thank you. And again, members, on a show of hands, please. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And that's carried by all. Thank you so much. So if we then move on to the Information Assurance Annual Report, and we have David Ingham with us.
Yes, we do. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
I should have. Sorry, I didn't tick your name up when we started at the beginning. I do apologise. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so this is the first information assurance annual report produced for the committee since IA separated from IMT back in April. As a reminder, IA core services include records management, data protection, which includes the statutory role of data protection officer, and information security. As you would expect, the purpose of the report is to give you evidence that the service is effective, but also to demonstrate that as a service we are responding to the challenges presented to the council across its diverse and wide scope of information processing. To gauge if the IA service is effective, I tend to ask myself 3 questions. The first is, are we aware of the council's IA position and are we improving it? The second is, are we reducing corporate risk and, in line with that, service risk? And are we supporting colleagues to deliver effective services? And I think the answer to that question is yes, hence the positive tone in the report. But that's not to say, obviously, that we are blind to the significant challenges we still face, and the response to that is an effective one, driven by risk management. There's 3 key themes I'd like to pull out in the report, if I may. The first is our focus on risk management. It very much drives lots of our activity. As I say, the scope and diversity of the information processing throughout the council is significant, so we need to focus our resources on the things that matter. And by processing, I mean capture, sharing, storage, and protection of information. The second is the need for continual improvement. That's both internal within the team, but also corporately across the council, to ensure that the IA service remains fit for purpose. And also the importance of positive engagement. That's not just internally with colleagues, but also with partners, with suppliers, and with members of the public. And we need to adopt a position, and I think we do adopt a position where our service is one that helps, not hinders. There's 2 elements of the report, if I may, Chair, just pick out, which are, I guess, not so positive. The first is the number of security incidents. So we had 259 actual incidents last year. That's incidents that were investigated and confirmed as being security incidents. As you will see, the report sets out that 89% of those were down to human error. That fits year-on-year trends. Human error always hovers around the 89-90% figure. The vast majority of those security incidents related to unauthorised disclosure information. What does that mean? In layman's terms, it means we sent the right information to the wrong person or the wrong information to the right person. So that could be letter or email. I think in this area here, it's important to understand context. The council sends approximately 6 million emails every year external to the council. So when you consider the number of 259 against that, it really is a small number, but that's not to say we're working very hard to try and reduce that even further. The second area, which is not so positive, is engagement with the regulator. So that's the Information Commissioner's Office, who are responsible for ensuring individual rights across personal data processed by organisations. The 2 key reasons that we've had engagement with the ICO last year, the first is data protection infringements. So that's where the council perhaps hasn't met its legal obligations. And we had 12 of those, 12 complaints via the ICO from members of the public. 7 were upheld, 3 were partially upheld, and 2 were dismissed. All of these matters were resolved to the satisfaction of the ICO, which is good news. And the second element where we would engage with the ICO is around the reporting of data breaches. So where we have a data breach and it meets a particular threshold, we are required by law to report those to the ICO. Again, we had 12 of those. We reported 12 reported data breaches. All were resolved. The ICO required no further action and they were consent with the council's response. And I think that demonstrates the robust reporting and investigation process that we have within the council. So those are the key points I wanted to pick out for the report. As I say, it's the first report, so I hope it's useful, hope it's informative, and I welcome any questions or feedback, Chair.
Thank you, David. That was very informative. Yes, I think it's really very interesting to see all the information we've got there. But any questions for David from members, please? Do you have anything to ask David on this one? Bob. Rob.
Oh, right, sorry. Yeah, apologies. Could you just tell us, David, about the 25 loss of data in hardware? Because a loss of data could mean something small and something big. How much do you worry about this? I know you could answer, we worry about every loss of data, or hardware, but I just want to know the extent or the volume that was involved.
You're absolutely right. We do worry about every loss of hardware or data. And our approach really is to understand what mitigating controls or circumstances are in place when there has been a loss. The vast majority of those reported or lost laptops or stolen laptops, for example, from boots of cars or from buildings. And because it's so common that we rely on encryption of laptops, encryption of hardware. So I think the initial report of lost hardware always worries us, but what gives us confidence is the fact that we take reasonable measures to mitigate the risk of loss through encryption of hardware. It's what's the most common event actually is theft of laptop from the boot of a car, and we had 7 or 8 of those last year. All of the devices were encrypted. All of the devices were removed from our network. The worrying thing was, alongside those laptops were hard copy documents. Now, obviously, you can't encrypt hard copy documents. So what we do is we investigate fully what that information is, what the impact is to the council, and also what the impact is to the individuals concerned within that documentation. So yes, we do worry about it all, but we have a very robust process in place to follow that up.
Can I just ask one more question? Is this getting worse or better? And, what training management issues can we put in place to get a greater assurance that this is being managed?
It's not getting worse, which is good. Last year we had 261 actual incidents, so we're down by about 3. I think in terms of the organisational response, we're in a very healthy position actually. We have mandatory training in place. We have managers and senior managers who understand the importance of information within the council, and we have a workforce who are very good at reporting data breaches and security incidents, which is it's very difficult to get to that position actually. As I say, I think the issue here is human error. And if anybody can help me understand how to reduce human error and mistakes, I think we'll crack it. But it is a very difficult area to deal with. So I think in terms of the organisational response, we're in a very healthy position, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David. I do have Andrew, Ian and Paul wishing to speak. So could you ask questions to David in that order, please? That's Andrew, Ian and Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes, I applaud the report. I also applaud your general approach, which is to be as concerned about any breach as we quite properly are. And yes, I note the 6 million communications and therefore 259 incidents is a small percentage, but Dido Harding lost her job at TalkTalk for not very many breaches. It is a very, very serious reputational risk area, and trust and confidence in public data can be undermined. So, yeah, how do we get that 207 of unauthorised disclosures down to an awful lot less? You say you have training, you say you've got protocols, management awareness, a staff culture that, is a bit like the airline culture of it's good to report near misses. But could I urge you to carry on looking for any authority that's managed to get it down to negligible numbers by further training, further systems, and so on. And finally, is the Information Commissioner concerned about that level of unauthorised disclosures for a county council of this size?
Thank you. Just to answer the question around the ICO, so we don't report all data breaches to the ICO, report only those that hit a particular threshold, and that threshold is where it's likely to pose a risk to the individual concerned. and there were 12 of those. I think the ICO doesn't publish figures per sector, unfortunately, on the number of incidents, so it's very difficult to compare. But what they do is record every time we engage with them, and they are aware of all of our previous breaches. They haven't yet voiced any concern. In fact, they're very content with our response across each of those 12 data breaches. That's both in terms of how we've dealt with the initial breach, how we've mitigated the breach, and how we've, where necessary, communicated with the individual concerned, so that normally a member of the public or a service user. So I'm not particularly concerned about that. I think you're right. I think we constantly have to look at ways of reducing that number down, because one incident is too many incidents. There was an exercise over the last 3 years to try and compare local authorities. There was a company called Big Brother, who you may have heard of. They do lots of FYs across local authorities to understand the data breach scenario. And I find it very, very difficult to believe, but a number of authorities reported 0 breaches. Now, you could argue that's because they don't have a transparent reporting culture in place and staff are not willing to report. And of course, the downside of having reporting culture that we do have is that we have a higher number of breaches reported. But I absolutely agree, we have to continue working to look for ways to reduce that, and that's what we do throughout the year, every year.
Thank you.
Ian, thank you.
Hi, David. Just a quick one. Well, there's 2 points actually. Number one is I'm kind of guessing on page 125 that the fourth bullet down, key headlines, already resulted in significant improvement. I'm presuming that says previously unmanaged records as opposed to preciously unmanaged records. I know you take it very personally, but I'm guessing that's not the case. That might be a typo, or it might be the PDF thing that's caused a problem.
Sorry, what page is that? 125?
125, fourth bullet under key headlines.
Yeah, that's a spelling error. My apologies.
I like somebody who's, to be honest, preciously is probably actually more treated than they've probably been for some time. But again, this kind of leads into my broader question, which is with obviously COVID, we've had a look at this. There's kind of sentences in the paragraph above saying it's going to take some time for the paper documentation. So we haven't got, which we know because this is a mammoth task, a grasp of most of the issue and how long that'll take to resolve. That's going to change with COVID. But also just working practices generally at this moment obviously have taken a complete shunt. And with all the stuff that you were doing and all the great work, and I echo everything everybody said so far, great report, really good start, keep it going.
Thank you.
The activity past is great. What I want to see is how that plays into the activity going forward, knowing what you know and how that will play into the way people have been working, behaving in this environment, spotting those problems before we get there. What I'm really interested in is that forward-looking piece that says taking that, what do we want to focus on? Where do we want to focus our communication? Everything we've said is the same thing. One breach is a breach too many, but therefore the education piece needs to change as well. So I think for me, I'd like to see a lot more of that forward-looking, the so what question, taking this and building from that, please, for next time. And if you can give me more of an accurate sense about how long those preciously managed documents are going to be preciously sat there, that would be great. Because I think I'd like to get more of a time frame, because obviously that is an exposure, as you said, you can't encrypt paper documents.
Yes, thanks. I think one of the challenges we have with the records management project and giving timeframes is there's a lot of unknowns out there currently. Historically, some records have not been managed appropriately, and our records manager is literally walking into rooms full of boxes of records that were previously unknown. But I do absolutely get your point. The quicker we can get a grasp of that, the quicker we can understand the scope of this problem, the better informed the timeframe will be. I think we do recognise that COVID-19 has created additional risk. So where we've had to be flexible in our approach, for example, with technology in order to respond, people are creating records outside of our normal document management systems. We've raised that risk, and our records manager is putting forward a mitigation plan to apply once we get into the recovery phase and we start to bring that corporate information back into the corporate centre. So again, I absolutely recognise that risk.
I've been really cheeky. Sorry, David.
Yeah,
I suppose my question is recovery phase is a state we might get into, but actually with lockdowns and re-lockdowns and everything else, actually that could keep going backwards. Can we afford to wait that long if this is a continued exercise? Given the fact that this is now accumulating documents, and I'm looking around my office thinking I'm glad I go back to the office now and again because I can dump my stuff in and file it. But if people can't do that, they're accumulating. We may not be able to wait. I suppose is there an exposure anyway we need to know about?
We recognise that, and I think there will be some exposure because some people do need to work off hard copy documents. We have started to treat that risk, and we've started to push out general guidance and advice aimed at those service areas that do use hard copy records in their home environment. So we advise things like reducing it where possible, making sure it's securely destroyed, try and keep it in the electronic format if that is at all possible. But you're absolutely right. This is something that we need to deal with now, and we are taking steps to do that. I think the point you raised about looking forward and improving records management is absolutely valid. And alongside the 3-year project, we've got to... Sorry, were you talking there? Sorry.
Apologies. Can I just take this phone call? I just need to deal with the situation. Richard, David, I am listening, but I just need to take this phone call as well at the same time. I do apologise.
Yes, if I could just come in.
Sorry, Chair, you're muted as well.
Is there, just picking up from where Ian sort of left off and some aspects regarding computer security for starters, the hardware, is there any mechanism by which we can actually trace where these machines are? I mean, I know you can put tracking devices on, but you'd probably only do that in very limited circumstances, if at all. And also on the manual records, do we, because obviously for social care functions, a lot of the social workers have to keep records, and they're the ones that would be likely to accumulate more than everybody else. Because if they're going onto Mosaic, I don't know whether they just go, well, they would tend to do it electronically. I don't know whether we don't need to print something off or not. But I'd agree with you. We've got a big issue with lots of paper of an historic nature deposited all over the place. And if we have other ways of working, and we may change where people physically work and everything, we need to get to the bottom of where that paper is, and in some instances, how we're going to destroy it if we don't actually require it.
Yes, and we're for the records management project, we're just hitting the stage now where we're starting to destroy records. So we're able to give managers some seriously good management information about the records that are held, and then we provide that information to them and ask them to make a decision whether that information is retained and subject to better control or destroyed. Many of these records we've got some records that go back to the 1940s. You know, there's a huge amount of records that we have to identify and resolve. I think on the matter of tracing devices, there are, I think, over 5,500 devices currently out there with staff. We haven't considered tracking devices yet, because we think a more appropriate response is to ensure they're encrypted. So if they are lost, they are essentially useless. But also, in terms of a computer security response, we make sure those devices can no longer connect to the network. So they are effectively a doorstop once it's reported. And in terms of the social workers, yes, you're absolutely right. The mobile nature of their work means they will carry a lot more information around them. I think on the upside of that is they're very used to working in that environment, so they're used to working with documents more, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to raise their awareness and help train them and guide them and how to look after that information correctly. Very challenging, but it's worthwhile doing.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ian.
Apologies for that. Sorry.
Okay.
So no, David, thank you for your explanation. I was happy with it. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay,
Right,
thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. David, Appendix 1, Training and Awareness. Looking at page 129, and 18-19, we managed to train 90% of our staff, and 19-20, we managed 86%. So in essence, we slipped back. Would like a bit of an explanation around that. But training and awareness, this is an ongoing game. You know, with other speakers have broached on the subject of going paperless. Well, I'm paperless this morning. I've got another screen up with things on. Even that presents problems, and obviously the data has to be managed. And as well as certainly with systems, it's the data that gives the value to the system, not the hardware. So there's all sorts of games in there. So just really seeking assurances round with the e-learning. Some people's approach to this is, I tick this box and it goes away and I've done my training. How do we get that embedded?
Okay, so the reason that there's a simple reason for the training being down at 86%, and that's COVID. So traditionally, at the end of the reporting year, people who haven't done their training will do their training within the last 3 weeks of the financial year. That's what we see in terms of trends. And when COVID kicked in and staff started working from home, we sent out a request not to undertake any e-learning over the network because it was putting unnecessary stress on the network. That unnecessary stress has now been taken away, but that was post the end of the financial year. So I'm confident that had COVID-19 not occurred, we would have broken the 90% barrier. So that's the reasoning behind it dipping slightly. You're absolutely right. E-learning is just one aspect of training and awareness, and we always support that with additional layers of training and guidance. So we do face-to-face presentations. And as you'll see in the report, we focused very much on cybersecurity last year because the biggest risks to the council is from emails, malicious software and emails or phishing emails. And we receive approximately 5,000 of those every single month. So we've done face-to-face training on cyber. We've done face-to-face training on records management to make them aware of the risks and how they could help reduce that risk. We have an excellent set of 1-minute briefs and 5-minute briefs, which we regularly send out to staff. So it's a whole package of training and awareness, not just e-learning. And essentially, you know, we try our very best to make sure that staff also understand that we are here to support them. So requests for support and guidance have also gone up significantly over the last 12 months. And I think that's excellent. And that's reflective of the fact that we're getting out and about more.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you all. Just one last question from me, David. If we're looking towards the future, obviously internationally there's some tensions at the moment, and there's been some fairly comprehensive attempts by some nations to hack through public computer systems, of which ours is one. How prepared are we from a disgruntled other state taking a swipe at some of the county councils' computers? I mean, I think this would be a national problem, but what's your view on that?
So you're absolutely right. It's an international problem. Nation states, despite having access to significant resources and capability, often launch attacks which are very low level and cheap. They look for organisations which have very easy to leverage vulnerabilities in their systems. They don't want to waste money or technology or capability on low-level targets. And I would class us as a low-level target. Even though we're part of local government, we're still low-level in the bigger picture. We introduce a number of different technologies to try and prevent those attacks from happening. For example, in the last 3 months, we've introduced technology on our network perimeter to stop people from intruding onto our network. So we have new IDS and IPS software on there. But also the primary attack vector, as they call it, the method of attack, is via email, and it's phishing emails. So they'll send an email to a member of staff, and they will request credentials, the member of staff will provide those credentials, and that gives that attacker access into the network. And I think we've got some excellent security controls in place across the element. So we have, I would call it world-class software to help us prevent from email attacks. We have an excellent vulnerability management program, which actively goes to look for problems in our network and gaps in our security in order to fix them. So whilst I can never say that we will always prevent attacks, in fact, I think anybody who has a connection to the network will be subject to a cyber attack. Not might, will be subject to a cyber attack. I think we are in a reasonable position, but there are still some areas that we need to develop and improve on, and that will be continual. That will never end. Unfortunately, the threat from a cyber attack is now a fact of life.
Thank you, David. Very informative, and again, greatly appreciated the report we've had. I think it's very, very interesting and gives us lots of food for thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do I have any other members wishing to say? So we've got the recommendation which I'll propose, which we note the information assurance activity for 1920 and the key activities designed to give the Audit Committee confidence that the information assurance function remains effective and relevant to the Council's needs. So I will propose those recommendations. Do I have a seconder, please?
Quite happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. And members, could we indicate approval in the usual fashion? Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Unanimous again. So if we can say thank you to David, and we will now move on to the item 9, which is the draft statement of accounts, which we have looked at in our training this morning, to get an overview of those. So with that in mind, I will pass over to Michelle, who's anxious to get going on this.
I am, yes. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay.
So the committee's presented with the draft statement of accounts to scrutinise and comment on, and they include the local government pension scheme and fire and rescue pension fund accounts as well. The government's actually pushed back the deadline for publishing the draft accounts to the end of August. But we're still trying to work to an earlier deadline, and we have published our accounts for public inspection on the 1st of July. And the auditors are already with us and auditing the accounts at the moment. There's no specific issues to highlight in the accounts other than the issue that's been included in the covering report around the pension fund information in the accounts. There's some uncertainty around the asset valuations on the unquoted assets in the pension fund. Normally these valuations would roll over from previous years, and there's not usually any material valuation problems to account for whilst we're putting the accounts together, but those valuations are due to be coming in over July, and we'll need to monitor those, and if there are any variants that are material, we will obviously need to adjust in our accounts to reflect that. We'll report that back when we come to committee in September. The narrative report on pages 143 through to 161 sets out the context for the accounts and picks out some of the key pieces of information, some of the key indicators for the reader on financial health of the council and the future challenges for the council. That includes the revenue budget outturn for the financial year 2019-20, which is on page 146 of the report. And it shows that the council underspent its revenue budget by £27 million during 2019-20. 12 million of that was relating to schools, so that will be passed through for them for future years to use. The capital programmes also set out on page 148, a summary, and that shows an underspend of a £17 million net underspend on that on the capital programme. Page 150 of the report shows the assets and liabilities movement. There's a key movement noted there on the pension liability, and you'll see that as a feature throughout the statements in the accounts. This is relating to the triennial survey, the actuarial report survey of the fund, and some reduction in the pension liability identified there and included in our assets and liabilities balance sheet. The narrative report also looks at our financial resilience and future challenges, one of those being COVID and Brexit. Although these items haven't really focused in the numbers in the report, we've had to look at it because obviously it's basing a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of assumptions made in the accounts, and given the uncertainty at the time, we need to keep these under review. So note 3 of the accounts sets out our assumptions and the assumptions we've made when we've put accounts together on things like asset valuations. And given the current uncertainty, that's something that we will keep coming back to and reviewing during the period whilst the accounts are being audited, just to ensure that our assumptions are realistic and whether they need reviewing or not. The main statements in the accounts are on pages 163 to 166, and I'll just go through a couple of those just to pick out some key numbers that have varied from previous years. So the comprehensive income and expenditure statement for April to March 2020. I'll pick out a couple of figures where we've got some significant changes from the previous year there. So on the line sustaining and growing business and the economy, you can see the gross expenditure there is quite significantly higher than it was in 18-19. This is because we have charged an item called REFCUS, which is an accounting term, which is effectively it means revenue expenditure that's funded by capital statute. And what this means is we'll have spend in our capital programme that we've budgeted for, and we will have paid and we've been reporting through our capital programme. But actually, because this spend doesn't result in us owning an asset or having an asset on our balance sheet, we have to charge that back to revenue in the year. So one example of this on that particular line is a 4.5 million contribution to the skills investment programme through the economic region team. We will have spent that money in our capital programme, but effectively we don't own an asset at the end of that. So it's effectively a grant or a contribution. And that's why that spend on that line is significantly higher than the previous year. Another one where we've got a large variation is on other budgets. The committee will recall when we were having these discussions last year, there was a number of issues around the McLeod judgment, and again, our pension contributions. But we did make some adjustments to our 18-19 accounts that would have been backwards going, so would have been a number of years impact. And the difference there is the impact of the McLeod judgment on the pension contributions in the 18-19 year, which obviously hasn't had such a significant impact in the current year for 19-20. Another area of big change is on other operating expenditure. This is where we record, one of the items that we record is loss on sale of assets, or disposal of assets rather. And effectively, this is where we will record any assets that have left our balance sheet, and this is primarily where schools have converted to academy status. So they're no longer counted as an asset on our balance sheet, and we recognise that as a loss. Obviously not a cashable loss to us, but a loss in our operating expenditure. Not an actual cash loss though. And the other item on the bottom of there, remeasurement of the net defined benefit, quite a swing there. And again, this is to do with the pension liability that I've just mentioned before. So the next statement is the movement in reserves. You'll see there on that statement, generally the movement from last year to this year isn't noticeable on most of the areas. The unusable reserves has changed, again, to do with the pension liability and the adjustment that has in our accounts. But you'll see from that as at March 2020, we've got earmarked funds there, earmarked reserves of 189 million and general fund reserves of 15.8 million in our usable reserves element, which is therefore supporting the sustainability and future costs of the council. Just on the balance sheet, again, no noticeable changes there other than the long-term liabilities, again, relating to the pension liabilities, but that shows you the assets and liabilities of the council. But again, as I say, the only notable change there is to do with the pension liabilities, and that's noted in note 25. And the cash flow statement is just that. It's a statement of our cash at a particular point in time, and sets out the movements in the year. So the pension fund accounts are shown from page 292 of your report. The pension fund for fire and rescue, should I say, the fire and rescue pension fund is an unfunded scheme. So effectively, this is just a record of transactions going in and out of the payments to do with the fire and rescue pensions. And the LGPS pension fund accounts are noted from page 296. Again, one of the key changes on that is to do with investment liabilities, and that's explained in note 12 of the pension account notes. So I'll hand over for questions. I imagine there's a few, so I'll take questions and try and answer them. If not, I'll come back to the committee with any follow-up comments or questions that we need to deal with.
Thank you, Michelle. Very informative run through. And I see Ian would like to be your first question, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you.
First thing, thank you. Michelle, I say really good set of accounts, by the way, and also presentationally, actually really easy to read compared to a lot of them. So thank you very much for that. My question really is around the resilience element of this and COVID, and having gone through group account reductions recently as well, not just for the auditors, but for obviously for the council itself and for all the stakeholders. In terms of running the scenarios, the reserves, the everything on there about the level of sensitivity analysis we've done that may be required for audit purposes because they're looking for greater and greater disclosure as well in the accounts. How comfortable are we that we've done that whole scenario planning that takes us now, not just beyond the next few months, but, you know, when does it start to bite? When do we hit a problem stage? I'm not saying we will get to that point, but, you know, what does that look like and what would drive us to that place?
Okay, so in terms of the information that's in the accounts, obviously I've kind of mentioned that we've got the assumptions that we've used for the information in the accounts in note 3. And as I said, we're working with the valuers. It's mainly about asset valuation, and we're working with the valuers just to make sure that that is a true reflection. And if that changes, we'll update that. In terms of resilience going forward, I think the narrative statement does set out that it's very true to say we've incurred an awful lot of costs as a result of COVID. We have lost some income, but we're not as sensitive to that as a number of local authorities. We don't have a large proportion of commercial income, which I know a number of the districts are particularly sensitive to at the moment, things like car parking and commercial rents and things like that. So we haven't suffered in terms of that respect. And actually, that's an indicator on the SIP for financial resilience indicator, but actually is working in our benefit at the moment. We've received to date, we've received £35 million worth of grant from the government, and we're doing monthly reporting back to government on the use of that and our forecast use of that. We're updating those forecasts almost daily, based on decisions that are being made. The big spend areas that we've got at the moment are things like PPE and supporting the adult social care market. So we've put an awful lot of resource into supporting the care market, and actually our sustainability fund that we've put in place to support the adult care market is being recognised, certainly regionally, and we've had feedback from the Care Association representation saying that that's been very well received, and they're very grateful for that. So we're putting an awful lot of steps in place, but we're monitoring what that's doing in terms of our spend, and what the weekly run rate is on those kind of costs. We as we're forecasting at the minute, we possibly could exceed that £35 million grant, but we have been notified that there is a third tranche of money about to be, hopefully this morning, will have been announced by the government what that is for us. So I think we're confident, given the level of reserves that we've got and the amount of monitoring we're doing and the controls we're putting in place around supporting the market and supporting our residents. I think we're happy that we're doing as much as we can in terms of resilience in that respect. I hope that covers it.
I'd say I'm just going to be a little bit more proddy if I can, because I think we are doing some really good things. But again, when the auditors come back, they go, that's lovely, but what happens if? And it's that bit of coming back and saying, actually, if the money did run out after this one, how long can we start doing things, or when do we have to start making tough decisions, and when do we? It's that sort of that point of, we can do that, but we have to think down that when does it become difficult? And part of the answer for the accounts is those scenarios, which absolutely right would cause us to have a problem, we view them to be as so remote as to not be realistic. That's fine, but we've considered them and we've come back. And I think that's certainly my learning that I've taken, is you have to go to that dark place and explain when and where that would look like. If we've got that, that's fab, and be planning for it now, but then you can discount it as well.
Yeah,
so
I
think it's that bit after.
I was going to say that the work we're doing on the COVID expenditure, particularly, as well as we're doing our normal budget monitoring. So the first quarter's budget monitoring will go through to overview and scrutiny at the end of the summer. But we are looking at, if this run rate continues for X many weeks or X many months, what does that look like in terms of cost, and when does the grant run out? So we've got that information, and we've been doing that kind of analysis. Obviously, the grant isn't our only source of funding for us, we've got that assurance that we've got over £50 million in the financial volatility reserve as well, that's being held by the council for future budget pressures. So we've done the calculations in terms of, if this continues for this long, we've got a weekly run rate of the costs we're currently incurring. There's a number of variables in there that are quite difficult to forecast. Things like what's going to happen on school buses in September. Are there going to be enough buses for kids to get on? And future spikes of infection as well, obviously having a huge impact on things like the care homes and stuff like that. But we're doing those different analyses, and we're aware of when the current grants will run out, and what that means in terms of needing to call on other areas of the council. We're just putting a message out to budget holders at the moment, because they're doing their forecasting, and we're looking at pieces across the board about where we think there are savings that we're making at the moment. So there definitely will be savings on things like travel, printing, conferences, things like that. And we're giving that message to budget holders that, please make sure that you're not just recycling these into other things that might not be necessary, because we might need it to actually balance our books at the end of the day. So those messages are going out as well.
Cool. Because again, that's the problem, is we have to sign a going concern is for 12 months after the accounts are being signed. And as the Police and Crime Commissioners auditors have discovered, if they are basically 12 months behind that already because of their error, not the PCC was ready, the answer we've had to do a whole ton of additional work now for the going concern and the COVID for the Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner. So yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and proving you got 12 months is quite challenging. But
and I think the government have issued, and CIPFA have issued, guidance around. There's a number of authorities looking at Section 114 notices. I know some of the local districts are going back and doing emergency budgets and things like that. We've worked through the numbers. We're not in that position.
Great.
Absolutely not. So, and that's due to prudence in previous years around the level of reserves that we've kept, and the very strong monitoring and budget position we've had about delivering savings as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I think the reserves are absolutely crucial, aren't they? I know they look huge, but they're not. When you start to draw down in them, they wouldn't go that far when you wanted to. If you stopped all your funding tomorrow, not that that's going to happen, because you've got to take, like Ian said, that's the sensitivity analysis that's the key. And also the fact, unlike some of the district authorities, our income streams, in other words, we don't look at other income, do we, Michelle? So as you said before, we're not. I mean, we are subject to some losses of income, so things like our heritage service, some of the parking and highways income that we get for things like that. But it's very, very minimal compared to some of the districts that are hugely reliant on town centre parking and things like that. So we've been fortunate in that respect. And unfortunate that the government's recognised that the importance of maintaining the care market, the social care market, and actually providing funds for us to do that. Particularly in looking at the adult social care market, particularly in Lincolnshire, where you've got a very large geographical area, which is always the problem we've had with, because our costs per patient, if you like, are going to be greater pro rata than a lot of other areas. That's absolutely wonderful, Michelle. I'm going to ask Andrew now, who's asked to raise a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As an external new member, this is the book of the experience that I've been through in the last 12 to 14 months. So in that respect, it is a confirmation of the assurance that I've increasingly got that the prudence and the soundness of systems that the council has ensures sustainability and continuity for the future. And you've particularly highlighted adult social care, which, with my NHS hat on, is absolutely critical. So I applaud you there. I applaud you on the report. I applaud the expanded narrative section, because that's the sort of thing that I, as a layman, can understand, rather than the detailed financial statements necessarily. And that, along with the notes, tells a very good story that can be easily understood. So congratulations all round. And yes, reserves look healthy, but when I was managing budgets, I wanted 40% of turnover in reserves, because when it goes pear-shaped, it can go pear-shaped in a very major way. So I don't think they're excessive at all. Now, an information question. These accounts, when they're finally passed on our recommendation, they go to the Department of Community and Local Government, I assume. What sort of feedback and what sort of response do we get from them on the accounts?
We don't actually send the accounts to MHCLG. We have statutory returns that we have to complete, which basically we have revenue outturn returns and budget returns as well. So they have a format for statutory returns that we're required to send to them each year. The deadline for doing that will probably be very shortly, actually. We usually get till July to do them. I presume they've extended that a little bit. They're looking at the audit opinion. So what's important to them is what goes back to the government in terms of audit. And obviously there's a name and shame list for those people that don't publish in time. That's done more through the professional organisations, though. And the government use this information for basically not statistical, but for getting a feel for where money's being spent and where pressures are, I think. So rather than the quality of the narrative report, don't think they're really very interested.
Now, what I was thinking of, for instance, in the NHS, 16 clinical commissioning groups are just reportedly censured for not spending enough on mental health, because there was a statutory requirement to increase the spending by greater than inflation. Presumably, if we were doing anything that rang an alarm bell in the minds of senior civil servants, we would get a response from them.
Well, the joy of local government is that it's up to the local communities to hold us to account effectively, and whether we're meeting our statutory duties and our policies and statements about what services and what we're trying to achieve as a council. So we don't get that pushback from government because it's a local democracy. So we don't get that pushback, but they obviously monitor how things are being spent in terms of cash across the board.
So it's up to us to spot any googlies then.
It is up to it's a local decision how we spend our money. We obviously have statutory responsibilities we have to meet, and we are held to account for those. And obviously David's report prior, the ombudsman and people like that have a role in all of that. But it's very much about local decision making and local council deciding how it wants to prioritise its spend.
Thank you.
And you won't get away with being the new boy. You know that's going to wear off after a while, don't you, Andrew? I've done this twice now. You're not going to get away with saying that you're new boy for any longer, I don't think.
Okay.
Thanks, Michelle. Other members, any questions from other members, please? Alex, Rob, Paul, Adam?
Sorry, Chair, no questions from me, thank you.
Thank you. Just while the others may be thinking about it, we've obviously got Brexit coming up on us on the inside, although it's sort of gone off the boil in terms of the news worthiness at the moment. But that's coming up on the 31st of December. It's still something, as we note in the narrative, that we're still on the radar. And clearly, in terms of Lincolnshire as a whole, probably looking a little bit outside our area, but we have the major freight terminals that Grimsby and Hull as well, although they're on our borders. But that will definitely have an impact on how things are distributed throughout the county at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we've picked it up in the narrative report as something, depending on how we, whether a deal or whatever's finally done, it will impact on our taxation and from a process point of view, and obviously on the way things move around the county. Obviously, large farming communities, things like that, it will have a wider impact depending on what the outcome is.
Yeah, indeed. And again, we can't foresee all that. There's an awful lot of uncertainty. All we can do is be prepared as we can. And to go back to your financial resilience point, I know with meeting with members in other settings, members of other county councils, we are in a much better position than many others who are probably don't have the luxury of having quite so much financial resilience behind them. So that's good. Okay. But then we can't be complacent, of course.
No, the importance now is to maintain that, which something we'll be doing very much during this year.
And on the pension fund, Michelle, obviously we've got that 229 million uplift, but it could be a 230 million downfall immediately after the year end.
Well, the nice thing about the pension fund is it's usually spread out over a long time.
It is, yes. We're looking at it over the next 20 years, not the next 20 months. So it is a long-term proposition. And again, you have diversified assets, and that's a good investment strategy to do. So, okay. Yeah. So any further questions from members on the account? No. Okay. Right, so we have moving to the recommendation, and thank you for your input, everyone, and particularly Michelle for answering all our questions. We have, obviously these are draft statements, so they are subject to amendment prior to the final copy, as we said, with the filing deadlines extended. So I'll propose that the members of the Audit Committee obviously scrutinise and comment on the draft account, and we have done that. So if I could have, that's just stating the obvious really, but have a seconder for that. The recommendation, please. Can someone second me?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. And then if we can move to the vote in the usual way, members. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's definitely carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we move on to the final item on the agenda, which is item 10. And we could just invite Lucy to introduce the work plan, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The work plan has your forward agenda items. There's just a request for a change from September meeting coming forward from the external auditors. They've asked for their annual audit letter to be, with the changes in the deadline, to be moved to the 16th of November. So they will not be bringing their paper to the September meeting. So that sort of picks up following Michelle's. The other sort of slight change is the annual report for the Audit Committee. we normally have a workshop in July to talk about what you want included in that and the key messages you want to go to full council. Having discussed it with the chairman, we're proposing to do a survey, so in August, to get your views, and hopefully that will pick up any sort of comments that you might wish to be considered, so the draft can be brought forward to your September committee. The chairman's looking to take that through to informal exec and the council after the September meeting. So I think that's really all I really wanted to sort of raise on the work plan. It's hopefully sort of self-explanatory and gives you some good areas of agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Regarding the work plan, anyone? I think it's relatively self-explanatory from what we discussed before. Now I have, and I without bringing my diary up the precise dates, but I have booked in, and Cheryl will nod to address the informal exec on the audit committee's report prior to the full council meeting. After we've discussed it, I'm trying to think what dates, but I've scheduled it in the diary anyway. We did it a couple of weeks ago with in consultation with the Democratic Service. I'm just trying to find what the date was.
Chairman, Chairman Brooks. Yeah. It's the 10th of November that you will be attending informal executive to present the draft annual report.
At 2 o'clock.
Yeah, and then it will be council in December, which is the 11th.
Thank you for your assistance on that one, sorry, Cheryl. Thank you very much for your assistance on that. I'm trying to trawl through my diary. Yes, I didn't go so far enough on. That's lovely. Thank you very much. And I think we haven't done too badly. We're 2 minutes past 1. I think that we've kept to track quite well and debated everything thoroughly. So thank you once again for everyone for attending, and hope you all keep well. And just to refresh my memory, Cheryl, when are we meeting next?
Just bear with me, Chairman. It's the 28th of September.
Oh, quite a way away. So obviously the council generally has its summer recess in August anyway. It's going to be a strange one this year. We've not seen each other for so long. But let's cross our fingers and hope things get back on track for September. But I think we've got to be a little bit realistic about how things are going to go, and just hope for the best and prepare for the worst, I think. So all the best to everyone, and enjoy your summer.
Thank you.